one beautiful story is I hadn't paid my rent for 3 months, which is pretty irresponsible. I think all of us at one point or another didn't have money for rent, but you're still living there and you gotta whatever, either figure it out eventually, but hope for the miracle. Anyway, nothing had really happened. I don't fundraise, and here I was. The landlord calls me and he says, listen, tomorrow is 3 months. And you know what my rent was then? My rent was $400 a month. $400 a month. Can you imagine not having $400 a month? My rent was $400 a month, and we lived in 2 little rooms. The front room had room enough for a table. The back room it was big enough for my wife and I, and then we had an accordion partition where my children slept, all on one bed. At one point we had 4 kids in one bed, which was really awesome. And I want to tell you something about those times, because I grew up in a mansion in West Los Angeles with chefs and driver and people keeping the grounds and the pool man and the tennis court blower and all these, it was really, 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 elite type of upbringing I had. My wife also grew up in a big mansion. Her father retired when he was 40. And the only way I got to Israel was from my father's bankruptcy. So I wound up with a scholarship trip. I took the free ticket. And my wife has her own story how she got here. But her parents weren't offering anything. My parents didn't have anything to offer. They weren't offering. My parents had nothing to offer. And here we were living like this, the 2 of us in a room with 4 kids in one bed, meaning 2 heads there, 2 heads there with their feet intermingled. And then my wife and I on the other side of an accordion partition. And I want to tell you something. The happiest I've ever been in my life is now, and yesterday and the day before that, but this was the happiest time. I mean, the most meaningful, powerful time of my life. Spiritually, I was learning full-time Torah. I was learning all morning, all afternoon, and a couple hours a night. My prayers, when I would step into Shmoneh Esrei and go into my prayers, it was probably every Shmoneh Esrei was 45 minutes. 3 times a day of just the silent meditation that most people knock off in 2.5, 3 minutes. It's 45 minutes every time. Our Shabbos meals were in heaven. I still meet people who are at those meals who just say they never, and the bathroom was next to the table. It's the whole time you're in the bathroom, you're just do you guys mind singing Zmiros? It was so awkward to have that bathroom there. And what could we do? We were living in this tin can. But it really, I have to say that it was one of the richest moments of my life. Really one of the richest times of my entire life. And the neighbors, how they kind of rallied for us. They lived that way for generations in Jerusalem. We live in a neighborhood that's in Jerusalem now for 200 years. So they saw us and just took care of us. I mean, we were sleeping on beds they provided. We had a baby. The crib came from some other neighbor. They didn't even ask. They just brought. We were invited out anytime we wanted to eat in one of their houses. They had no money. But here's the real story that just blew me away. The landlord says, listen, you either come with $1,200 tomorrow or you're out. Because it's not a free apartment. I need the rent money. And so I go to my night Seder as usual. I got a chavrusa at night and I'm sitting in shul near my house, a block away. And meaning the next courtyard. I actually live under this shul that I'm telling the story about now. But then I lived the courtyard next to it. And I'm sitting in shul and this... my chavrusa, that means my learning partner, my chavrusa says to me, what's wrong with you? You're not here. You're totally distracted. And I told him the story. I said, listen, my wife has no idea, but we're moving out tomorrow. And we don't know where we're going because we don't have any money. And I owe $1,200 tomorrow, tomorrow morning. And it's now the middle of the night. And, it's we're having this conversation, and when he finally realized I can't concentrate, it was 10:30 at night. So he says, okay, I get it, Anyway, so we spoke a little more, learned a little more, and then I start walking home. Right before I get to my door, a man comes running up to me. He says, listen, I sit in front of you at night where you learn. I sit in the row in front of you. And you can't see each other because there's big backrests on each thing, because that's the backrest becomes the stender of the person who prays behind. So I never saw this guy before. He just was like some crunchy looking yeshiva guy, you know, and looked like he desperately needed a dry cleaner for his suit. And anyway, this guy walks up to me. He says, "Listen, I speak a little English, and I couldn't help but overhear that you're about to leave our neighborhood, you know, tomorrow." And he says, "I have enough money this month for my own family. Here's $1,200. Just pay your landlord." I said, "But I have no idea when I can pay this back." And he's like, "Don't pay it back. Just take it." And I started crying. And went home and didn't even tell my wife. I didn't want her to know how bad it was. And I paid the landlord the next day. And that was the last time in my life that ever happened to me. I never ever had a situation like that. You know, I wasn't a chronic. Some of these guys are chronic. You know, we all know some people are chronic. You know, and by the way, I help chronic people. You know, I have a guy who calls me once in a while and just, you know, says it's his turn with the kids. And, you know, he just needs 200 shekels just to be able to get some food for them. Or sometimes he's couch surfing, so sometimes he has to take an Airbnb or something just to have a place for his kids. And he's totally chronic, but I'll be there for him when I can. And anyway, but this guy chose the right address to do this with. Now, I found out later, you know, I got to know the guy a little bit. I found out later that he was living in the same situation as me, only 5 kids in his bedroom, with an accordion partition. He had 5 kids in his bedroom. And this guy had no money at all. Like, I got to know him over the years. This guy was totally broke. And I walked up to him and asked him, like, what was that? You know, years later, I asked him, what was that? He says, "I'm telling you, like, that money came from heaven. Because somehow, like, I don't know, someone sent me a check for like $2,000 or something, which you know, wasn't in my budget at all. I changed the check and heard your story and took care of you." But little things like that, little moves like that can put someone on the map for their life. Can restore someone's faith and trust. Had I moved out or had I gone to work at that point, I wouldn't be standing here today, that's for sure. So I want to share with you one more amazing story. And this story dates back 28 years. You gotta go. Yeah. This story dates back 28 years. At the time, I was a millennial Marxist, and atheist millennial Marxist. And I thought marrying a Jew was racist. And I thought getting married was irresponsible because of overpopulation and lack of resources. And meanwhile, on a split screen level, this institution, Aish Torah, had a program called the Jerusalem Fellowships. And the Jerusalem Fellowships, what they were doing is they were bringing 150 kids, which is 3 buses, a couple floors of a hotel, and trips all over the country, and Shabbatones and everything. A 6-week experience, scholarship, that like Ivy League type kids, like real scholar types, put together types, can come and be part of this whole experience here in Jerusalem. And what happened was the Gulf War broke out. And this is 1991. The Gulf War broke out with Saddam Hussein and who was he fighting against? The U.S. And he was lobbing Scud missiles into Israel. Now, every Scud missile that landed into Israel, Aisha Torah would get a phone call saying, they would get like 15 phone calls saying that we're not coming, meaning we're not sending our child, or the kid themselves said we're not coming. And so, but it was like Scuds were falling every day throughout the winter. And it was a trip for June. It was a June trip. But every day, 15 more kids were gone. So then they were like, okay, one less bus. So they called the bus company, like, 2 buses. And then, called the hotel, and they're like, 2 floors. And it just kept going like that. And then eventually they called the bus company, like, okay, 1 bus. And called the hotel, we need 1 floor. And, and then start calling staff saying, we don't need you, because we just, we don't need that much staff. But then more Scud missiles fell. And when the number got down to 29, they had a leadership meeting of the group that was organizing this trip. They had a leadership meeting and canceled the thing because it's not even a bus. 29 people is not a bus. Buses hold 50, and it wasn't even a bus. It was such a different animal at that point. And who knows if more Scud missiles are going to fall? And they're just like, it's over, canceled. 10 days later, the wife of a yeshiva guy comes in pretty excited that she finally finished the 6-week program. A beautiful brochure with a 6-week program, what's happening with each day. Because this was before email. There was no internet at the time. And she walks in with it, goes up to the head of the program and says, here's the program. And the guy looks at her and he's like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. She's like, what? She says, we canceled this trip 10 days ago. Oh, no. And this woman's like, I mean, it's hard to call a woman a nerd, but in this case you could. There's like Coke bottle glasses. She's a Cola wife. Very introverted, like very introverted. Like really prefers to be left to herself and her computer and her graphic design work. And she says to the head of the program, she says, so how many kids you said were left? And he said 29. And she's like, but you have 29 secular Jews interested in coming to Jerusalem for 6 weeks, and you're not going to bring them? And he explained to her how logistically it's just not going to be, it's not a go. And she's like, well, I don't understand how you can do that. Because there are 29 kids who are willing to come to learn Torah in Jerusalem. And he's like, I explained to you already. It's a different animal. We've canceled it. It's over. We've sent people back to America who are flying in for this. Like, it's not happening. And she says, I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can stand before God and go into this summer knowing that 29 kids were willing to come learn in Israel for 6 weeks. And he says to her, listen, lady, if you think we should run it, you run it. She said, I will. Now, me thinking marrying a Jew was racism and thinking there wasn't even a God. I'm graduating University of California, Santa Barbara, UCSB, UCAN Study Buzz. I'm graduating in a week. My father's gone bankrupt, so he can't even give me the promised round-the-world ticket for surfing internationally. 2-year promise that I could surf for 2 years straight. Just keep touring the globe. Lost all his money, couldn't deliver. I became the 30th person of those 29. All these university Ivy League people and then one serious hippie from Santa Barbara. And she was a pretty interesting lady to be leading our trip. It was pretty out of the box. But she did it, and she did a great job. And all of our lives were changed, all 30 of us. all 30 of us are observant today. And many of the 30 are Torah leaders today. Names you've heard of. And the females are not only, many of them are in leadership positions, but many of them are married to like really big, powerful like rabbis in the world today, are making massive differences. One of them is married to an Aish rabbi. I'm sorry, she's married to our madrich. He was our madrich, and they got married. That was the Glazers, who are now in New Jersey somewhere. The lesson from this is that sometimes we feel that we are ill-equipped to get something done. Sometimes we just feel like you got the wrong guy. And many of us feel that about a lot of things. I mean, our best example is Moses. I mean, Moses certainly felt this way. Moses was like, God, at the burning bush, Moses was like, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. And Moses is like, hello, God, like, don't you realize I shepherd sheep, not people? And God's like, you got an amazing skill set, man. Go shepherd the Jews for 40 years across the desert. And Moses argued a couple more times, but eventually gave in and took care of business. But we're all being asked to step into positions. Now, obviously, for a living, you want to do what's perfectly right for you, but we're often being asked to wear hats that aren't naturally ours. But if you want to live in a world of what I call LSD, which stands for large siyata d'shmaya. It's Aramaic. Large siyata d'shmaya means divine. How do you say that? Divine assistance? If you want to live in large divine assistance, when you see that there's a need, you can go fill roles that you are couldn't even be like the opposite of your skill sets or the opposite of your personality type. I'm not talking about for a living. You never do that for a living, because then you die young from overstretching yourself. That's not how you spend the bulk hours of life. But to be able to step into a role, to make that difference, is exactly what happens when there's a deep need for something. Okay, everyone be blessed. Good Shabbos. All the best.